Well, Patrick, it's really nice to see you. I trust things are going well in Prague as spring comes our way.
It's great, Rodney. Thank you. It's not very spring-like outside. It's snowing as I speak,
Oh,
but
no.
spring is in the air.
Well, time marches, so it's coming your way. So, Patrick, tell me about what's the tax landscape like in the Czech Republic today?
Yeah, well, the Czech Republic is a small, open economy within the European Union, and so a lot of the tax rules and the environment are very much a product of where we are physically and politically. So the system is quite simple on the whole. It's a simple tax regime, but it's become a lot more complicated over the years, primarily due to external factors such as the OECD BEPS and related European Union developments. So I would say that's the most characteristic aspect of it. In this region, especially, there has been quite a bit of tax competition, and you can see that in the tax rates. The tax rates here and all the neighboring countries are very similar to each other, which of course is no coincidence. And certainly some of the Western European countries like Germany, historically have, seen, the Eastern countries as, a little bit of competition in terms of tax revenues and so on. So, but no, on the whole, it's I think it's not an unfriendly environment. It's an environment where taxpayers can cope pretty well, and it's reasonably stable and dependable. But of course, with its own challenges, both current and the future.
And when we think, so certainly, that stability has to be very welcoming to multinational investors, right? Just a sense of predictability. But tax isn't static these days. And I'm just curious what the impact of things like BEPS and these international initiatives, what the impact of those are having on the environment.
Well, the Czech government on the whole, and not just the government, but the ruling classes, I think they tend to be quite astute, and they don't like to be outliers in any respect. So whilst they're certainly not at the forefront of putting forward global initiatives or being the first necessarily to implement them, they don't like either to be the exception in the other direction. And so generally we find that most of the measures which come through the OECD and the EU tend to be taken up. What we see is very often they tend to be taken up on a minimalist kind of level, like the country will do what it needs to do at minimum, not necessarily much more. I'm not sure if that's a specific policy decision other than just wanting to keep life as simple as possible and perceiving that some of the issues which the global initiatives are trying to address are maybe not always, necessarily the most important topics locally, which are, keeping the people up at night locally. That's what I feel. And I think there probably is an element of feeling that, the country is a small country. The capacity is obviously not comparable to big countries like the United States or the UK. And, it's having an overly complex system just doesn't fit what the local authorities are able to administer. So, keeping things administrable is an overriding, let's say, objective of the government.
Probably makes a world of sense, right? If you're trying to maintain flexibility, predictability, and stability for inbound investment, managing complexity is a key thing that you just have to focus on, right? So it makes a world of sense.
Yeah, but we still get into knotty, thorny areas, which are the result of the way things are implemented. I mean, so for example, one of the hot topics for us, as well as many other people within Europe, has been the new mandatory disclosure rules. And that is very complex to manage, because when we're dealing with structures which involve multiple jurisdictions, you have to read the same rules multiple times, because they may be applied differently, interpreted differently, and we have different cultures as well. You might have some cultures within Europe that are very conservative, wanting to disclose as much as possible, whereas others may be a bit more reticent, wanting to take a more balanced view, saying something needs to be disclosed or maybe not. So that is probably been, the area that the clients that I've spoken to, local multinationals, which we have a few, that they have found the most challenging in the last few months.
Interesting. And Patrick, I'm not going to try and put you on the spot, but if I was to ask you to crystal ball gaze and say, what are the things that folks should be thinking about over the next, 6 months or so, or what's coming down the pike? In any one or two items that you think folks should probably be keeping their eyes on as they sort of think about the midterm?
Well, it only affects a minority of taxpayers, but important ones. And we still have a digital service tax in the pipeline, so to speak. And this is another area where the government has been prevaricating to some extent, flip-flopping, so that there's been a proposal for a tax really in place for over a year. And it was supposed to be in force already. It was delayed by a few months, and we sort of thought that it maybe had been, kicked into the long grass and maybe, just put, indefinitely delayed. But very recently, the Minister of Finance has announced that she's keen to push ahead and to push the law through the legislative process, with a view of having it in place by the middle of this year. So that will affect the big tech companies, the Googles, the Apples, and so on. And what is notable about it is that the rate is relatively high. In fact, the law provides for a 7% rate, but although it is expected that will be reduced down to 5%. So that certainly is something worthy of note. And I think part of the thinking has been that the government is really strapped for cash. During these difficult times, there's been unexpected expenditures, and the revenues have suffered on the other side. So not unique by any means in the world. There's currently search for new resources for the state.
Well, that sounds like something that's certainly worth keeping an eye on for multinational investors, because whether it's 7% or 5% on gross income, right? That is a substantial potential expense for businesses to factor into how they do their business. So that's a good one to watch the space for, Patrick. Well, look, spring is coming. I hope vaccines are coming your way as they're coming here. It's very nice to catch up with you. Very nice to catch up with you today, Patrick.
Great to see you.